In the glittering world of the ultra-rich, loyalty is a currency often spent, and betrayal is a debt collected in public. Tonight, at the year's most exclusive charity gala millionaire developer, Julian Vance decided to make the most public statement of his life. With his stunning mistress on his arm, he prepared to humiliate the one person who had been his silent foundation, his pregnant wife, Eleanor. He thought he was rewriting his life story in front of the city's elite. What he didn't know was that Eleanor was about to arrive with a ghost from his past and a titan of industry, ready to tear his carefully constructed world apart, chapter by devastating chapter. The celestial room at the Pinnacle Tower was a universe unto itself. Suspended 50 stories above the sprawling city lights, it was a space designed to make mortals feel like gods. Crystal chandeliers, heavy as frozen waterfalls, dripped light onto tables draped in ivory silk. The air, thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume, hummed with the low thrum of powerful conversations. This was Julian Vance's natural habitat. At 42, Julian had the kind of polished, predatory good looks that wealth and confidence amplify. His suit was a custom Tom Ford, so dark it seemed to drink the light, and the Patek Philippe on his wrist was a subtle but clear declaration of his status. He moved through the crowd with an easy, practiced grace, his hand possessively on the small of his wife, Eleanor's back. To the casual observer, they were the perfect couple. Julian, the self-made real estate magnate who had reshaped the city's skyline, and Eleanor, his beautiful, serene wife. She was dressed in a deep sapphire gown of flowing silk that elegantly disguised the gentle swell of her 5-month pregnancy. Her auburn hair was swept into a classic chignon, and the diamond earrings Julian had given her for their 3rd anniversary were her only adornment. She was the picture of understated elegance, a stark contrast to the more ostentatious displays of wealth around her. But beneath the placid surface, a chasm had formed. Eleanor smiled when Julian's business associates greeted them, her voice a soft, pleasant murmur. Yet her eyes, a deep shade of forest green, held a weariness that the shimmering lights couldn't quite conceal. "Darling, you remember Mr. Abernathy from the board," Julian said, his voice a smooth baritone that never betrayed his true thoughts. "Of course," Eleanor replied, extending a hand. "It's a pleasure to see you again, Robert. Your work with the Children's Literacy Fund is truly inspiring." Robert Abernathy, a man whose face was a road map of corporate battles, beamed. "Eleanor, always a delight. Julian, you lucky dog. Beauty and brains." Julian chuckled a sound that didn't reach his eyes. "She's my better half, keeps me grounded." The words were perfect, a well-rehearsed line from the script of their public life. In private, grounded meant silent, compliant, and available. The last time he'd asked about her day, he'd checked his phone 3 times before she'd finished her first sentence. As Abernathy moved on, Julian's grip on her back tightened slightly. "Try to look a little more cheerful, won't you? People are watching. This gala is important for the new waterfront project." "I am smiling, Julian," she said, her voice still quiet, but with a new edge of frost. "It's a performance, Eleanor. Everything is. You used to understand that." He scanned the room, his gaze dismissive, as if searching for someone more important to talk to. He was right. She had understood it. When she'd first met Julian, she'd been a brilliant, driven analyst at a top-tier consulting firm, armed with a prestigious degree and a mind that saw patterns others missed. He had been charming, ambitious, and utterly captivated by her intelligence as much as her beauty. He'd promised her the world, a partnership in every sense of the word. She'd fallen in love with that promise. She'd put her own soaring career on hold, believing she could help build his empire from behind the scenes. And for a while it worked. Her insights had helped him navigate treacherous market fluctuations. Her strategies had secured him 2 of his biggest early deals. But as his success grew, his appreciation for her contribution shrank. She became less of a partner and more of a possession, a beautiful, intelligent accessory to be displayed at events like this. Her pregnancy, which should have been a joyous bond, had become another wedge. When she told him, his first reaction wasn't joy, but a flicker of annoyance. "Well," he'd said, staring at his reflection in the bedroom mirror, "we'll have to hire another nanny, and make sure you get a personal trainer lined up for after. The Harrington yacht party is only 8 months away." Now standing in the heart of his kingdom, Eleanor felt a profound and chilling isolation. She ran a subconscious hand over her stomach, a small protective gesture. The baby, their son, was the only thing that felt real in this glittering cage. Julian was distracted again, his eyes fixed on the grand entrance of the ballroom. A small, self-satisfied smirk played on his lips. It was a look Eleanor had come to dread. It was his "I have a secret" look, the one that usually preceded a new acquisition, a corporate takedown, or more recently, a lie. "What is it, Julian?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Just enjoying the evening, darling," he said, patting her hand dismissively. "Go mingle for a bit. Talk to some of the wives. I need to handle something." Before she could respond, he detached himself from her side and strode towards the center of the room, near the stage where the evening's host was preparing to speak. He moved with the confidence of a king in his own court, clapping backs and shaking hands, his charisma a tangible force field. Eleanor watched him go, a knot of ice forming in her stomach. She knew that look. It wasn't about business. It was something else. She saw him speak to the event organizer, then glance back towards the entrance, his anticipation palpable. He was waiting for someone. And with a sickening certainty that settled deep in her bones, she knew it wasn't a business associate. It was the final act of a betrayal that had been playing out in whispers and shadows for months. The late-night meetings, the scent of a different perfume on his shirts, the cold detachment in his touch. She stood alone for a moment, an island of sapphire silk in a sea of black tuxedos and sequined gowns. The polite smiles of the people around her felt like grimaces. Their curious glances felt like daggers. They all saw the perfect wife of the great Julian Vance. But she was a queen in a gilded cage, and she could feel the lock beginning to turn. The murmur of the crowd began to shift. It was a subtle change at first, a ripple of whispers starting near the grand archway that served as the entrance to the celestial room. Heads turned, conversations faltered. A new arrival had captured the room's attention. Eleanor, standing near a pillar, adorned with white orchids, followed their gaze. A woman had entered, and she was not designed for subtlety. She wore a dress the color of blood rubies, a scandalously high slit, showcasing a tanned leg. Her blonde hair, a cascade of perfect artificial waves. She was undeniably beautiful in the way a sports car is beautiful. Sleazy, expensive, and designed to be noticed. Eleanor recognized her instantly from the glossy pages of gossip blogs. Amber Collins, a 25-year-old model and aspiring influencer whose fame was built on a foundation of strategically leaked photos and associations with wealthy men. Amber's eyes scanned the room with a practiced air of someone searching for a camera, but they locked onto one person, Julian. A triumphant smile spread across her face. Julian, who had positioned himself near the stage, turned and opened his arms as if welcoming a head of state. Amber sashayed towards him, her hips swaying with deliberate provocation. The whispers in the room grew louder, turning from curious to shocked. This wasn't just an affair. This was a public declaration. When Amber reached him, Julian didn't hesitate. He pulled her into a dramatic embrace and kissed her a full, open-mouthed kiss for everyone to see. The flash of a phone camera went off, then another. The polite hum of the gala had died, completely replaced by a stunned, voyeuristic silence. Eleanor felt the air leave her lungs. It was as if she was watching a movie of her own life, a scene so cruel and surreal it couldn't possibly be real. Yet the pain was agonizingly authentic. It was a physical blow, a hot spike of humiliation that shot from her chest to her throat. She could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes darting between the spectacle at the center of the room and her, the lone, abandoned wife by the pillar. Pity, scorn, a morbid curiosity. She felt them all. Julian finally broke the kiss, but kept his arm wrapped firmly around Amber's waist, staking his claim. He grabbed a champagne flute from a passing waiter and tapped it with a knife, the sharp clink, 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 demanding absolute attention. "Friends, colleagues," Julian began, his voice booming with unearned confidence. "Thank you all for coming tonight to support such a wonderful cause." He paused, his eyes sweeping the room, deliberately skipping over the spot where Eleanor stood frozen. "Tonight is about celebrating success, passion, and authenticity. It's about being true to oneself. And for too long I haven't been entirely true." A collective gasp went through the room. This was no longer just gossip. It was a public execution. "Many of you know my wife, Eleanor," he continued, and for a heart-stopping second, he glanced in her direction. There was no remorse in his eyes, only a cold, dismissive finality. "We've had a comfortable life. But comfort is the enemy of passion. It's the slow death of the soul." Amber preened under his arm, her eyes glittering with victory. She looked directly at Eleanor, a small, venomous smirk on her lips. It was a look that said, "I won. You're yesterday's news." "Tonight," Julian declared, raising his glass higher, "I want to be authentic. I want to introduce you to the woman who has brought passion back into my life, the woman who inspires me, who challenges me, who makes me feel alive. My future, the incredible Amber Collins." The applause was hesitant, scattered, and deeply uncomfortable. Most people just stared, mouths agape. They were watching a man detonate his own life, and the collateral damage was standing just a few feet away, her world shattering in silence. Eleanor's first instinct was to flee. To run from the burning pity in everyone's eyes, from the triumphant glare of the woman who had stolen her husband, from the cruel, self-serving monologue of the man she had once loved. Her hand trembled as she clutched the small, beaded purse in her hands. Her legs felt weak, her vision blurred at the edges. But then she felt a tiny, fluttering movement inside her. A gentle kick from her unborn son. It was like a jolt of electricity. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about the child she carried, the life she was responsible for. Running away would be an admission of defeat. It would be accepting the narrative Julian was so cruelly painting of her, the weak, discarded wife. No, she would not give him the satisfaction. She drew a deep, ragged breath, straightening her spine. She lifted her chin, her gaze locking onto Julian across the room. The hurt was still there, a raw, gaping wound in her chest. But something else was rising through it, a cold, clear, and powerful rage. It wasn't the hysterical rage of a scorned woman. It was the quiet, focused fury of a queen whose kingdom had been usurped by a fool. Julian saw her looking. He had expected tears, a panicked exit. He had not expected this. He had not expected the stillness, the unwavering strength in her eyes. For a split second, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. He had miscalculated. He had assumed the woman he'd systematically isolated and diminished over the years would simply crumble. He turned back to Amber, pulling her closer as if for reassurance, and laughed a little too loudly. To the future, he toasted, trying to recapture the momentum. But the moment had been punctured. The room's attention was no longer solely on the adulterous couple. It was on the pregnant wife who refused to break. Eleanor stood her ground, her sapphire dress a beacon of dignity in a room suddenly filled with cheap drama. She felt the tears welling hot and sharp, but she blinked them back with ferocious willpower. She would not cry. Not here. Not for him. She began to walk. Not towards the exit, but slowly, deliberately towards the edge of the crowd, her path taking her past some of the most influential people in the city. She didn't look at them, but she could feel their gazes shift, their respect growing with every poised step she took. She wasn't running. She was retreating, yes, but with the tactical grace of a general repositioning her forces. She reached the relative quiet of the foyer, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The polished marble floors felt like ice beneath her heels. She allowed herself one moment to lean against the cool wall, closing her eyes. The image of Julian's kiss burned into her mind. A single hot tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. She wiped it away with an angry flick of her finger. That was all he would get. She took out her phone. Her fingers were shaking, but her resolve was hardening into steel. She scrolled through her contacts, past her mother, past her few remaining friends Julian hadn't pushed away. She stopped at a name she hadn't called in over a year, a name from her past, a name that represented a different life, a different Eleanor. Her thumb hovered over the call button. It was a call that would change everything. It was a declaration of war. As Julian and Amber soaked in their tainted spotlight inside the ballroom, Eleanor pressed the button. The phone rang once, twice. Then a calm, familiar voice answered. "Eleanor, is everything all right?" She took a shaky breath, her voice low but clear. "Damien," she said, "I need your help. Are you in the city?" There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. A silence so profound, Eleanor could hear the crisp static of a secure connection. When Damien Blackwood spoke again, his voice had shed its initial surprise and taken on a tone of focused concern. "I'm at the Meridian 20 minutes away," he said. "Tell me what you need." His response was immediate, unquestioning. It was a stark contrast to Julian, who would have demanded a dozen reasons and weighed the personal cost before offering a sliver of assistance. "I'm at the Celestial Room Gala, the Pinnacle Tower." Eleanor managed her voice, steadier now. "Julian, he's made a scene." The understatement of the century. "Can you come here? I'm on my way," Damien said, and the line went dead. No hesitation, no questions, just action. Eleanor leaned her head back against the cool marble of the foyer wall, the phone still clutched in her hand. A wave of relief so potent it almost buckled her knees washed over her. For the first time in years, she wasn't entirely alone. Damien Blackwood was a ghost from her past, but a formidable one. They had met at Stanford, where she was a graduate student and teaching assistant already recognized for her preternatural ability with data analytics and predictive modeling. He had been a fiercely intelligent but raw undergraduate in her advanced seminar, a scholarship kid with a chip on his shoulder and a mind that moved at the speed of light. She had seen his potential when no one else did. She'd become his mentor, spending hours after class, helping him refine his audacious ideas, challenging his assumptions, and teaching him how to channel his raw genius into structured, world-changing concepts. He had once called her the architect of my career. It was under her guidance that he developed the foundational algorithm for what would become Ethelred, a global technology firm specializing in AI-driven, sustainable energy solutions. After she met Julian, she had faded from that world. Her correspondence with Damien became sporadic, then ceased altogether. He had respected her choice, but his last email sent years ago had ended with a simple, powerful sentence. "If you ever need anything, I'm here." 20 minutes. It felt like an eternity and no time at all. Eleanor composed herself, wiping the last trace of her single tear from her cheek. She smoothed down her sapphire gown and took a deep breath, picturing a wall of ice forming around her heart, shielding the raw, bleeding wound within. She would not let Julian see her pain again. Just as she was about to step back towards the ballroom, to face the whispers and stares with her newfound resolve, the entire atmosphere of the foyer shifted. The hushed chatter of the staff, the clinking of glasses from the bar, it all seemed to halt. The main doors of the Pinnacle Tower's private elevator bank slid open with a soft, expensive hiss. Out stepped Damien Blackwood. If Julian Vance commanded a room with the loud bravado of a conqueror, Damien Blackwood commanded it with the silent gravity of a celestial body. He was tall and lean, dressed not in a traditional tuxedo, but in a perfectly tailored charcoal grey suit, with no tie, his white shirt open at the collar. It was a look that screamed modern power, a quiet rebellion against the old guard stuffiness of the gala. His dark hair was cut short, his features sharp and intelligent, and his eyes, a striking pale grey, seemed to assess everything and everyone with unnerving speed. He was flanked by 2 men in dark suits who were clearly his security detail, but they remained discreetly by the elevator. Damien's focus was singular. His eyes found Eleanor across the foyer, and the hard, analytical edge to his expression softened instantly into one of genuine, deep-seated concern. He crossed the marble floor in a few long, purposeful strides. He didn't offer a platitude or a comforting touch. He simply stopped in front of her, his presence a shield against the curious eyes of the hotel staff. "Eleanor," he said, his voice a low timbre that was both calming and resolute. "Let's get you out of here." "Not yet," she said, surprising herself with the strength in her own voice. "I'm not running away." Damien studied her face for a moment, seeing the flicker of pain behind the steel in her eyes. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod of understanding. "All right. Then I'm with you. What's the play?" The phrase, "What's the play?" was what he used to ask her in the late-night study sessions at Stanford when they were mapping out a complex problem. It meant he trusted her strategy implicitly. Before she could answer, the doors to the ballroom swung open. A few guests needing a reprieve from the thick tension inside spilled out into the foyer. They stopped dead in their tracks when they saw Damien Blackwood. "My God, is that?" one woman whispered to her husband. "Blackwood? What in the world is he doing here?" the man muttered back. Damien Blackwood didn't do galas. He was notoriously private, a titan of the tech world, who valued his time and privacy above all else. His presence here was more shocking than Julian's tawdry affair. He was in a different league entirely. Julian was a millionaire who built luxury condos. Damien was a billionaire who was actively changing the world. His company Ethelred was valued at over $100 billion. The news of his arrival spread back into the ballroom like a shockwave. Suddenly, Julian Vance and his mistress were old news. The real power had just walked into the building. The whispers reached Julian, who was still holding court with Amber, basking in the nervous attention. He heard Damien's name, and his blood ran cold. He knew who Damien Blackwood was. Everyone did. Years ago, when Julian was first trying to secure venture capital, he'd been in a meeting where an investor had laughed him out of the room saying, "Your real estate projections are cute, but I just saw a presentation from a kid named Blackwood at Stanford that's going to be worth more than this entire city block." The name had haunted him ever since a symbol of a newer, smarter, more potent form of power he could never attain. What was he doing here? His question was answered when the crowd near the ballroom entrance parted. Through the gap, Julian saw a sight that defied all comprehension. There stood Eleanor, his quiet, subservient wife, looking more poised and regal than he had ever seen her. And standing beside her, his stance protective, his focus entirely on her, was Damien Blackwood. The sight was a physical shock. Julian felt a jolt, as if the floor had dropped out from under him. The smug, triumphant expression slid from his face, replaced by a mask of slack-jawed disbelief. Amber, sensing the shift in the room's energy and in Julian's demeanor, looked over. "Who's that?" she asked, her voice laced with insecurity. Julian couldn't answer. His mind was racing, trying to connect the dots. Eleanor. His Eleanor. With Damien Blackwood. It was impossible. It made no sense. His wife was a homemaker, a beautiful ornament. She didn't know people like that. She couldn't. Damien leaned in slightly and spoke to Eleanor, his voice too low for anyone else to hear. "Lead the way." Eleanor took a breath and stepped forward, re-entering the ballroom. Damien fell into step just beside and slightly behind her, a silent, unshakable show of support. The crowd parted for them as if they were royalty. The whispers were deafening now. They walked directly towards the center of the room, their path an arrow aimed straight at the heart of Julian's pathetic stage. With every step, Eleanor felt her strength growing. She wasn't the victim anymore. The pitying looks had been replaced by awe and confusion. She was no longer just Eleanor Vance, the discarded wife. She was Eleanor Vance, and she had arrived with a CEO. And her story was just beginning. The journey across the celestial room felt like a mile. The air crackled with unspoken questions. Julian stood paralyzed, the champagne flute still in his hand, looking utterly bewildered. Amber clung to his arm, her earlier confidence evaporating into a cloud of nervous confusion. She had won the battle for the man, but she was suddenly terrifyingly aware that she had lost the war for status. Eleanor and Damien stopped a few feet from them. The silence was absolute. Eleanor's gaze was fixed on Julian. The hurt was still there, a deep primal ache, but it was now overlaid with a glacial calm. She looked at the man she had loved, the father of her child, and saw a stranger, a weak, preening man who had mistaken her grace for fragility. "Julian," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence with perfect clarity. Julian blinked, as if waking from a dream. He tried to reclaim his bravado, puffing out his chest. "Eleanor, I see you've found a friend." He spat the word friend like an accusation. He looked at Damien, a sneer forming on his lips. Mr. Blackwood, I'm surprised to see you here. This isn't usually your scene. Slumming it with the real estate crowd. Damien's pale grey eyes remained fixed on Julian, his expression unreadable, but radiating an intensity that made Julian's posturing look childish. He didn't answer the jibe. He didn't need to. His silence was more powerful than any retort. Instead, he turned his head slightly, his attention devoted entirely to Eleanor. "Eleanor," Damien said, his voice warm, with a respect that Julian had never shown her. "I was so sorry to hear you'd stepped back from your work. The Blackwood algorithm, as the board still calls it, remains the cornerstone of our predictive analytics division. It's generated over $6 billion in revenue for Ethelred to date." The statement dropped into the room like a bomb. The Blackwood algorithm. Her work. $6 billion in revenue. A wave of murmurs washed through the elite crowd. These were people who understood money. They understood power. And they had all just heard that the quiet, unassuming wife of Julian Vance was the secret architect behind a multi-billion-dollar piece of technology for one of the world's most powerful companies. Julian's face went white. He stared at Eleanor, his mind reeling. He knew she was smart, of course. He'd found her hobby with numbers and analysis quaint in their early years. He had no idea, no conception of the scale of her talent. He had tried to clip her wings, never realizing she was an eagle. What is he talking about?" Julian stammered, looking at Eleanor as if seeing her for the first time. Eleanor finally tore her gaze from Julian and looked at Damien, a flicker of a genuine, grateful smile touching her lips. "You always gave me too much credit, Damien. It was a collaborative effort. I recall a collaboration where you did 90% of the work, and I brought the coffee," Damien replied, with a small, wry smile that was clearly for her alone. He then turned his gaze back to the stunned audience. "For those of you who don't know," he said, his voice projecting easily across the room, "Eleanor Vance is one of the most brilliant analytical minds I have ever had the privilege of knowing. When she left the field to support her husband's career, the tech world lost one of its brightest rising stars." He paused, letting the words sink in, letting everyone reevaluate the scene. The narrative had been completely rewritten. This was no longer a story of a cheating husband and his pathetic wife. This was the story of a fool who had thrown away a diamond and the titan who was here to pick it up. Julian was unraveling. "This is ridiculous! A preposterous lie!" he blustered, his voice cracking. "She's my wife. She manages the household." Amber, realizing her position as the inspiring future, was collapsing, tugged on his sleeve. "Julian, let's just go." But Julian shook her off. His entire identity was built on being the smartest, most powerful man in the room. That identity was now being publicly dismantled. "You think you can just walk in here and—" "Julian," Eleanor said, her voice cutting him off sharply. "Stop. You are embarrassing yourself." The authority in her tone shocked him into silence. She had never, not once in their 7 years together, spoken to him like that. She took a small step forward. "You wanted to be authentic tonight. You wanted to celebrate passion. Well, I have a passion too. It's a passion for my work, a passion you asked me to abandon, a passion you belittled and then forgot entirely." She placed a hand on her pregnant stomach. "And now I have a new passion, ensuring my son is born into a world where his mother is not defined by the man who leaves her, but by her own strength and accomplishments." Her words were a direct hit. They were not just for Julian, but for every person in that room who had ever underestimated her. Damien stepped forward, placing himself between Eleanor and Julian, a subtle but clear barrier. "My apologies for the interruption to your gala," he said to the room at large. "However, Ethelred is launching a new European headquarters. We've been searching for a president of global strategy and analytics, a position that requires a unique visionary mind." He turned to Eleanor, his expression softening once more. "Eleanor, the position is yours if you want it. It comes with a full board seat, a controlling interest in the new division, and my complete unconditional support. We can have the jet ready in an hour, or we can start tomorrow. Whatever you need." It wasn't a rescue. It was a coronation. The room was buzzing. The sheer scale of the offer was staggering, a position of immense power handed to her on a silver platter, not out of pity, but out of stated, quantified respect for her abilities. Julian looked as if he had been physically struck. He saw his entire world tilting on its axis, the waterfront project, his social standing, his carefully curated image. All of it was dissolving in the acid of this public humiliation, a humiliation he had orchestrated for someone else entirely. He had walked into the room, a king, and was now being revealed as a court jester. Eleanor looked at Julian, at the pathetic, crumbling facade of the man he was. She looked at the frightened, out-of-her-depth mistress clinging to his arm. And she felt nothing. The rage was gone, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. She turned to Damien, her eyes shining with unshed tears. But these were not tears of pain. They were tears of liberation. "Thank you, Damien," she said, her voice full of emotion but unwavering. "I accept." With that, she turned her back on her husband, on her old life, on the gilded cage. Damien offered his arm. She took it, and together they walked away, leaving Julian Vance standing in the ruins of the world he had so arrogantly set on fire. The crowd parted for them once more, their whispers now a chorus of awe. The tables had not just turned, they had been smashed to pieces. The walk out of the celestial room was a blur of stunned faces and frenzied whispers. Eleanor kept her head held high, her hand resting on Damien's arm. His presence was a solid, reassuring anchor in the storm she had just navigated. Her heels clicked on the marble floor of the foyer, a steady rhythm marking her march towards a new life. Damien's security detail materialized silently, forming a discreet perimeter that kept the most audacious gossip-mongers at a distance. As the private elevator doors hissed shut, sealing them in a capsule of quiet steel and polished wood, Eleanor finally allowed her composure to crack. Her shoulders sagged, and she leaned her head against the cool wall, closing her eyes. The adrenaline that had fueled her began to recede, leaving behind the deep, throbbing ache of betrayal. "Are you okay?" Damien asked softly, his voice devoid of pity, only genuine concern. "I will be," she whispered, not opening her eyes. "Thank you, Damien, for everything, for answering the call, for what you did in there." "I only told the truth, Eleanor," he said. "The credit was always yours. I'm just sorry it took something like this for it to be said out loud." The elevator reached the ground floor with a gentle chime. A black-armored Maybach was waiting at a private exit, its engine purring silently. One of the security men opened the door, and Damien guided Eleanor inside. The plush leather seats enveloped her, a cocoon of quiet luxury that felt a world away from the hostile glare of the gala. "Where are we going?" she asked as the car pulled smoothly into the city traffic. "My penthouse at the Meridian. It's secure, and you'll be able to think without interruption. You can have the guest wing to yourself for as long as you need." He looked at her, his grey eyes serious. This isn't a move, Eleanor. It's a sanctuary, a place to plan your next one. She nodded, too exhausted to argue, immensely grateful for his foresight. Meanwhile, back in the celestial room, chaos reigned. The moment Eleanor and Damien left, the dam of polite restraint broke. Cell phones were out, frantic fingers typing out the bombshell news. The gala was over. The main event had concluded. Julian Vance stood frozen amidst the swirling currents of gossip, amber still attached to his arm, like a decorative parasite. His face was a pallid mask of disbelief. He was no longer the center of attention. He was the subject of ridicule. Old business rivals looked at him with unconcealed glee. His allies avoided his gaze, suddenly fascinated by their dinner plates or the ceiling architecture. Robert Abernathy, the board member, who had praised Eleanor earlier, walked past him, shaking his head with profound disappointment. "You're a damn fool, Julian," he muttered, just loud enough for him to hear. "You threw away the crown jewels for a piece of glass." The insult hit Julian harder than any financial loss. His reputation was his most valuable asset, and he had just publicly incinerated it. He finally looked down at Amber, as if noticing her for the first time since Damien's arrival. He saw her not as the passionate, inspiring muse he'd proclaimed her to be, but as the cheap catalyst for his own destruction. Her ruby-red dress now looked garish, her expression of panicked neediness pathetic. "Get your hands off me," he snarled, shrugging her arm off. "Julian, what?" she began, her voice trembling. "This is your fault," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "You pushed for this public display. You wanted it too." She shot back, her fear turning to anger. "You said you wanted to show everyone you were with me." Their ugly whispered argument was the final, pathetic act of the drama. Without another word, Julian turned and stormed out of the ballroom, leaving Amber standing alone, the target of 1,000 judgmental stares. Her victory had lasted less than an hour. Julian's drive home to their sprawling modernist mansion in the hills was a blur of rage and panic. His phone began to buzz incessantly. The first call was from his publicist, her voice shrill with panic. "Julian, what did you do?" "The blogs are on fire. #Vance. Vexed is trending. I'm getting calls from the Times." He hung up on her. The next call was from Marcus Thorne, a key investor in the waterfront project. "Julian." Marcus's voice was cold as ice. "I just got off the phone with 2 other partners. We're calling an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. We need to discuss the viability of your leadership. Your personal conduct has put the project's brand at risk." Click. The calls kept coming. Each one was a nail in the coffin of his public life. He reached the house, the vast glass-walled structure that was meant to be a monument to his success. Tonight it felt like a mausoleum. He stalked through the cavernous rooms, calling her name. "Eleanor, Eleanor, we need to talk." But the house was silent, empty. Her scent was gone from the bedroom. He strode into her walk-in closet, a space larger than most city apartments. It was half empty. Neatly folded piles of clothes were gone. Her jewelry box was open, its contents cleared out, save for one item left pointedly in the center, the diamond anniversary earrings she had worn that night. The sight of them made his stomach clench. It was a clear, final statement. He finally slumped onto their massive, cold bed, his head in his hands. The arrogance that had carried him through life had been stripped away, leaving him raw and exposed. He had believed Eleanor was a part of his world, an asset he owned. The idea that she had a world of her own, one so much more, vast and significant than his, was a truth so destabilizing he couldn't fully process it. The Blackwood algorithm. 6 billion in revenue. The numbers mocked him. He built buildings out of concrete and steel, his wealth tangible but brutishly simple. She had built something from pure intellect, an invisible empire of data that dwarfed his physical one. And he had treated her like a child. In Damien Blackwood's penthouse, Eleanor stood before a floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the same city skyline Julian had helped shape. From this vantage point, it looked different, not like a series of conquests, but like a network of lights, a complex, interconnected system. Damien handed her a glass of water. "I've had my legal team put on standby," he said quietly. "They're the best. They can handle the divorce, prenup negotiations, everything, discreetly and quickly." Eleanor turned from the window, her expression resolute. "The prenup is ironclad. Julian made sure of that when his firm started taking off. It entitles me to a settlement, but it's designed to protect his primary assets." She took a sip of water. "But there's something else, something he doesn't know I'm aware of." Damien raised an eyebrow, listening intently. "For the last 2 years, I've handled the consolidated financial reports for the Vance Corporation. Julian thought it was just busy work to keep me occupied," she explained, a bitter irony in her voice. "About 6 months ago, I found irregularities in the funding sources for the new Dubai project. A series of shell corporations, money being routed through offshore accounts. It has all the hallmarks of money laundering." Damien's expression turned grim. "Did you tell him?" "I confronted him," she said. He laughed it off, said it was creative accounting, the way the big boys play. He told me not to worry my pretty little head about it. So I did what I do best. I gathered the data. I traced the transfers. I built a file." She met Damien's gaze, her own eyes like chips of green ice. "I have everything, Damien. A complete, undeniable roadmap of his crimes. I kept it as leverage, a nuclear option I hoped I'd never have to use to protect myself and our child. I think he just gave me a reason to use it." A slow, appreciative smile spread across Damien's face. He had come tonight to rescue a friend in distress. He was discovering yet again that he was in the presence of a queen. "Eleanor Vance," he said, shaking his head in admiration. "He never stood a chance." The 6 weeks that followed the gala were a study in contrasts, a perfect illustration of 2 lives diverging onto dramatically different paths. For Eleanor, it was a period of intense, liberating creation. Damien was true to his word. Ethelred officially announced the formation of its new European strategy division, headquartered in a sleek, minimalist office space in London that had been leased and furnished with breathtaking speed. The press release, which made headlines in every major financial journal, named Eleanor Vance as its president. It included a carefully worded, glowing quote from Damien Blackwood about reclaiming one of the tech world's lost geniuses. The story of her public humiliation was instantly reframed into one of epic, empowering triumph. Eleanor threw herself into the work with a ferocity she hadn't felt in years. The part of her brain that Julian had tried to lull to sleep roared back to life. She was not just a figurehead. She was the architect. She spent her days in video conferences, headhunting the brightest minds from across the globe, building a team that mirrored her own passion for data-driven ethical innovation. Her pregnancy, far from being a hindrance, became a source of focus. In the quiet London apartment Damien had arranged for her, she would work late into the night, one hand on her keyboard, the other resting on her growing belly, feeling as if she were building 2 futures at once. She glowed. The stress and weariness that had clouded her features for years vanished, replaced by a vibrant energy. Dressed in elegant but comfortable maternity business wear, she was the image of modern female power, brilliant in command and unapologetically pregnant. Her team adored her. They saw a leader who was not only a certified genius, but also empathetic and fiercely protective of her people. In stark contrast, Julian Vance's life was systematically, brutally unraveling. The fallout from the gala was swift and merciless. The emergency board meeting for the waterfront project had been a disaster. His investors, led by Marcus Thorne, had invoked a moral turpitude clause in their contract, citing the reputational damage he had caused. They didn't oust him immediately. Instead, they stripped him of his decision-making authority, relegating him to a glorified advisory role while they brought in an outside firm to oversee the project's completion. It was a public castration. His social life evaporated. Invitations dried up. Friends who had once clamored for his attention now crossed the street to avoid him. He was a pariah, a walking punchline in the very circles he had once dominated. Amber Collins, after a few desperate, tearful phone calls, which he ignored, released a tell-all interview to a trashy online magazine, painting him as a manipulative monster who had used her and cast her aside. It only made him look more pathetic. He rattled around the empty mansion like a ghost drinking too much, his days a blur of angry phone calls and bitter nostalgia. He became obsessed with news about Eleanor. He saw the articles about her new role at Ethelred, saw the pictures of her looking radiant and powerful. Each one was like a dagger to his ego. He couldn't reconcile the image of this global power player with the quiet wife he had ordered around. The first official envelope from Eleanor's legal team arrived a week after the gala. It contained divorce papers. Cold, efficient, and non-negotiable. It cited irreconcilable differences. Julian had laughed a bitter, hollow sound. He'd call his lawyer. He'd fight it. He'd drag it out. He still had money, and money was power. His confidence was shattered a month later. His lawyers attempting to contest the divorce terms were met with a calm, unyielding wall from Eleanor's legal team, the best, most expensive corporate lawyers in the country, courtesy of Ethelred. Then came the second envelope. This one was not from her lawyers. It was delivered by a private courier with no return address. Inside was a single, sleek black flash drive and a note printed in a simple, anonymous font. Julian. This is a courtesy. On this drive, you will find a highly detailed analysis of the financial architecture of the Vance Corporation's Dubai acquisitions, tracing back 3 years. It includes annotated bank statements from shell corporations in the Cayman Islands and Panama transaction logs, and a predictive model showing the exact probability of indictment by federal authorities should this information be made public. The probability is 97.8%. You will also find my terms for the divorce. They are no longer the terms outlined in our prenuptial agreement. You will transfer a 60% controlling interest of the Vance Corporation into a trust for our unborn son, to be managed by an independent trustee until his 25th birthday. You will retain a salaried CEO position, but with no ownership stake. You will also liquidate $50 million from your personal assets and place it into a separate, irrevocable trust for my personal use. These are not demands. This is the new reality. You have 48 hours to have your lawyers agree. If you refuse, or if you attempt to fight me, a copy of this drive will be anonymously delivered to the SEC and the U.S. Department of Justice. Julian stared at the note, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold it. He stumbled to his computer and inserted the flash drive. On the screen, His own criminal enterprise was laid bare with a terrifying, cold precision that he knew could only have come from one person. She hadn't just found the irregularities, she had dissected them, modeled them, and weaponized them. She had built an airtight case against him. The pretty little head he had told not to worry had constructed his prison. Panic, cold, and absolute seized him. This went beyond divorce, beyond social ruin. This was jail time. Decades of it. She had him, completely and utterly. Desperate, he picked up the phone. He didn't call his lawyer. He called the one person he thought might still hold some sway, the one person in Eleanor's old life who had always been kind to her. He called Eleanor's mother. An hour later, Eleanor's phone rang in her London office. She saw the caller ID her mother. "Mom, is everything all right?" "Eleanor, honey." Her mother's voice was flustered. I just had the most distressing call. From Julian. Eleanor's grip on the phone tightened. What did he want? He was a mess, crying, begging. He said you're trying to ruin him, to take everything. He said you're accusing him of terrible things and that it's all a misunderstanding. He wants to talk to you, to explain. He wants you to stop. Eleanor closed her eyes, a wave of disgust washing over her. Of course he would go to her mother. It was his last, most cowardly move, trying to use her own family's love against her. "Mum," Eleanor said, her voice firm but gentle. "The man you think you know does not exist. The man who called you is a criminal who is trying to escape the consequences of his own actions. Do not listen to him. Do not talk to him again. I am handling this. I am protecting myself and your grandchild. Do you understand?" There was a long pause. "Yes, baby," her mother finally said, a note of awe in her voice. "I understand. Be safe." Eleanor hung up the phone. The final thread of her old life had been tested, and it had held. Julian had played his last card, and it was a bluff. Now it was her turn to end the game. Julian Vance's world had collapsed with the click of a pen. Faced with the irrefutable, elegantly compiled proof of his own crimes, he had been forced to sign away his empire. His lawyers had confirmed it all. 60% of the Vance Corporation was now in a trust for his unborn son, and $50 million of his personal wealth was gone. But for his shattered ego, this legal defeat wasn't the end. He needed a final personal confrontation. Learning. Eleanor was in New York for a single day of meetings. He went to the Ethelred Tower, a desperate man preparing for his last stand. He looked like a ghost, haunting the gleaming, futuristic lobby. When the elevator doors opened, the sight of Eleanor stole the air from his lungs. At 7 months pregnant, she was radiant, dressed in a chic cream coat, and deep in conversation with Damian Blackwood. She exuded a calm authority that made Julian's stomach clench. "Eleanor!" He called out, his voice cracking. She stopped, her expression freezing into a mask of cool indifference. "Julian," she stated, her tone leaving no room for debate. "You should not be here. Please," he begged, rushing forward, his expensive suit rumpled. "It was all a mistake, a terrible mistake. I was a fool. Don't do this, Eleanor. Don't take my son from me." The hypocrisy of his words was staggering. A bitter, humorless smile touched Eleanor's lips. "My son," she repeated, her voice like ice. "You forfeited the right to call him yours when you chose to humiliate his mother in a room full of people. You don't get to claim him in your desperation after you discarded him in your arrogance. I can change. We can fix this," he pleaded, his voice breaking. Eleanor didn't even raise her voice. She simply reached into her briefcase and pulled out a slim file folder. "It's over, Julian," she said, holding the document like a verdict. "This is the final divorce decree, signed and filed. You have a job and a roof over your head, which is more than you deserve. My future and my son's future no longer includes you." Damien, who had remained a silent, powerful presence by her side, placed a light hand on her arm. "We'll be late for the board meeting, Eleanor." It was a quiet, final dismissal. Eleanor gave Julian one last empty look, devoid of hatred or pity, and turned away. He watched as she and Damien walked to the private elevators, ascending to a world he could no longer touch. Julian Vance stood alone in the marble lobby, a relic of a life he had single-handedly destroyed, listening to the faint chime that signaled her departure and his permanent, crushing irrelevance. Eleanor's story is a powerful reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. It's not just a tale of revenge against a cheating husband. It's a journey of rediscovering one's own value after it has been deliberately diminished by another. She didn't need a knight in shining armor to save her. She needed a partner who recognized the queen she already was. Her triumph wasn't in Julian's downfall, but in her own spectacular rise. She reminds us that true strength isn't about shouting from the rooftops, but about knowing your worth, and when the time comes, having the courage to claim it decisively and completely. If Eleanor's journey from heartbreak to a position of ultimate power resonated with you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this story with someone who might need a reminder of their own hidden strength. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more compelling stories of justice empowerment and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. What did you think of Julian's ultimate fate? Let us know in the comments below.